The most powerful villains always begin as innocent children. In the wake of the Empire's defeat, while celebrations still echoed across the galaxy, a child was born who would later cast a long shadow over everything the heroes of the rebellion fought to create. Ben Solo entered the galaxy in 5 ABY, just 1 year and 4 days after the Battle of Endor changed everything. His birth wasn't just a family milestone. It coincided with the signing of the Galactic Concordance, the treaty that officially ended the brutal civil war between the crumbling Empire and the rising New Republic. As diplomats signed peace accords, Leia Organa and Han Solo welcomed their son into what they hoped would be a peaceful galaxy. But peace was never destined for Ben Solo. Even before he took his first breath, his mother sensed something unusual through her connection to the Force. Leia felt both light and darkness swirling within her unborn child, contradictory energies that seemed to be fighting for dominance before he'd even opened his eyes. This wasn't entirely surprising given his bloodline. As the grandson of Anakin Skywalker, Ben inherited an almost frightening natural power with the Force, a legacy that would shape every aspect of his life from that moment forward. His name itself carried significant weight. Han chose to call him Ben after Obi-Wan Ben Kenobi, the Jedi Master who had first pulled Han into the larger story of the Skywalkers. It was a name that honored a hero, a name full of light and hope, a stark contrast to the path Ben would eventually follow. As a toddler, signs of his extraordinary Force sensitivity became impossible to ignore. During tantrums that are normal for any child, Ben's emotions manifested physically. Toys would shake, furniture would slide across rooms, objects would shatter, all without the child laying a finger on them. While these incidents concerned his parents, his relationship with Uncle Chewie provided some normalcy. The Wookiee became something of a mentor to young Ben, teaching him to fly speeders and even handle blasters when his parents weren't looking. These moments with Chewbacca represented rare instances of uncomplicated joy in Ben's early life. Behind his family's concerned smiles lurked a growing problem. Despite their obvious love for their son, Han and Leia's demanding responsibilities frequently pulled them away from home. Han spent much of his time mentoring young pilots, while Leia shouldered the immense task of helping build the New Republic as a respected senator. Their absences left Ben in the care of droids more often than not. The boy who carried the blood of galactic heroes found himself profoundly alone, developing a sense of abandonment that festered over time. What none of them realized was that Ben wasn't truly alone in his isolation. From the shadows of the unknown regions, a mysterious figure named Snoke had taken interest in the Skywalker heir. This powerful Force user established a telepathic connection with Ben, whispering into his mind during vulnerable moments, planting seeds of doubt about his family and exploiting his every insecurity. These whispers were actually part of an elaborate manipulation orchestrated by someone far more sinister, Emperor Palpatine himself, who had found ways to extend his influence beyond death. Sidious saw in Ben the potential for a powerful new apprentice who could help him reclaim control of the galaxy. Perhaps most damaging was the secret kept from Ben throughout his childhood, the truth about his grandfather. Ben grew up knowing his mother was Princess Leia Organa and his uncle was Luke Skywalker, the last Jedi, but the shadow of Darth Vader remained hidden from him. Han, Leia, and Luke agreed to conceal this truth until Ben was older, believing they were protecting him from a painful legacy. But children sense when adults are keeping secrets. Ben could feel the weight of unspoken truths whenever his family discussed the past, creating a wall of mistrust between them that grew taller with each passing year. Though parts of Ben's childhood contained happiness and love, a troubling pattern emerged as he grew older. His lack of control over his abilities earned him a reputation as a disturbed child. Objects would break or even explode around him when his emotions ran high. What might have been addressed with proper training instead became a source of whispered concerns. During one particularly painful moment, young Ben overheard his parents discussing him, with Han suggesting something might be fundamentally wrong with their son. The words cut deep, reinforcing the narrative Snoke had been crafting in his mind, that his own family feared what lived inside him. The boy, who should have represented a new hope for the Skywalker legacy, instead became increasingly isolated, conflicted, and vulnerable to the darkness that had been targeting him since before his birth. The same family that had saved the galaxy from tyranny couldn't see that their son was being pulled away from them by forces they didn't understand until it was too late. This is how legacies become burdens. This is how heroes can fail those they love most. And this is how Ben Solo's story began. Not with darkness, but with a child born into light who would spend his life caught between two worlds, never fully belonging to either. The boy, named after a legend, would eventually cast aside that name and forge his own dark legacy as Kylo Ren. But that transformation was still years away, and the path that led there was paved with moments where things might have gone differently, where Ben Solo might have been saved from the fate that awaited him. Childhood ends. For Ben Solo, that transition came earlier than most. In 15 ABY, just shy of his 10th birthday, the son of heroes began a journey that would reshape not just his destiny, but the future of the entire galaxy. Luke Skywalker had spent years contemplating how to rebuild the Jedi Order. After his brief attempts to train his sister Leia and the mysterious child Grogu both ended in their departure, Luke approached his nephew's training with renewed determination. He saw in Ben what others feared: raw, untamed power with limitless potential. While Han and Leia might have viewed their son's abilities with concern, Luke recognized them as gifts waiting to be harnessed. The Jedi Temple on Ossus became Ben's new home. The ancient Jedi world was chosen specifically for its history, a fitting location to resurrect an order nearly lost to time. Stone by stone, Luke had built this sanctuary, preparing for the moment when he would welcome his first true student of the new generation. Ben Solo carried the weight of being first, a pioneer in Luke's vision for a restored Jedi Order. Their training began not in meditation chambers or sparring arenas, but aboard the Millennium Falcon. Luke and Ben embarked on archaeological expeditions that took them to the farthest reaches of the galaxy. They scoured ancient ruins on forgotten worlds, recovered texts from hidden temples, and collected holocrons containing the wisdom of long-dead Jedi Masters. These journeys served multiple purposes. They built Ben's knowledge of Jedi history, strengthened his connection to the Force, and created a bond between master and apprentice. One significant expedition led them to Ahch-To, site of the very first Jedi Temple, where Luke discovered sacred texts that would later become central to his teachings. During these travels, Ben showed remarkable aptitude for absorbing knowledge. His questions were thoughtful, his insights impressive for someone so young. But beneath his outward progress, shadows lurked. The pressure of being Luke Skywalker's nephew and Darth Vader's grandson created a burden no child should bear. Though he didn't yet know about Vader, Ben sensed the expectations placed upon him. He was not just learning to be a Jedi, he was expected to live up to a lineage of legends. One of the most significant milestones in Ben's training came when he constructed his own lightsaber. The creation of this weapon is a deeply personal ritual for any Jedi, requiring precision, patience, and a strong connection to the Force. Ben's crystal resonated with a brilliant blue energy, similar to the weapons once wielded by both his uncle and his unknown grandfather. With this blade in hand, Ben's natural talent for combat became apparent. His movements were fluid, his instincts sharper than students twice his age. Luke had trained many in the ways of the lightsaber, but none showed the innate skill Ben possessed. As word spread about Luke's academy, other Force-sensitive individuals arrived seeking training. Hennix, with his analytical mind, Tai, whose compassion and spiritual connection to the Force offered a calming presence, and Vo, whose determination drove her to push beyond her natural limitations. While Ben welcomed the company at first, complications soon emerged. His abilities outpaced theirs effortlessly, creating an unspoken divide. Vo in particular struggled with jealousy, working twice as hard, yet never managing to match Ben's natural talents. This dynamic only reinforced Ben's growing feeling of isolation, of being fundamentally different from those around him. Despite these tensions, Luke recognized Ben's maturity and leadership potential. By his teenage years, Ben was entrusted with teaching responsibilities, overseeing training sessions for younger students. He guided them through basic lightsaber forms using training blades, corrected their stances during meditation, and helped them understand how to feel the Force flowing around them. These moments brought rare clarity to Ben's increasingly troubled mind. When teaching others, he found purpose, temporarily free from the doubts that plagued him. Unknown to Luke, Snoke's influence continued during these years. The mysterious figure maintained his telepathic connection to Ben, subtly planting doubts about Luke's teachings. Why did the Jedi forbid attachments? Why focus on restraint when power beckoned? These whispers found fertile ground in Ben's mind, especially during moments of frustration or isolation. Snoke expertly exploited the gaps in Luke's teachings, the unanswered questions, and Ben's natural curiosity about aspects of the Force deemed too dangerous to explore. Luke wasn't blind to the changes in his nephew. During training sessions, Ben occasionally displayed flashes of aggression that concerned his master. His combat style grew more intense, more ruthless, diverging from the defensive approach Luke taught. In quiet moments of meditation, Luke sensed growing darkness within Ben, similar to the conflict he once felt in his father. Yet he remained hopeful, believing his guidance could keep Ben on the right path. This hope led Luke to intensify Ben's training. They spent more time studying ancient texts, practicing advanced lightsaber techniques, and exploring deeper aspects of Force connection. Luke believed that by keeping Ben focused on his studies, he could protect him from whatever darkness sought to claim him. This approach created distance between them as Ben began to feel more like a project than a person. A philosophical divide gradually emerged between master and apprentice. Luke adhered to traditional Jedi principles: emotional detachment, selflessness, suppression of anger. Ben increasingly questioned these tenets. Why deny natural emotions? What was the purpose of power, if not to shape the world as one saw fit? These weren't merely abstract debates, but reflections of Ben's internal struggle between the Jedi path Luke offered and something else calling to him from the shadows. As years passed, Luke's concern grew into fear. During one meditation session, Luke reached out with the Force and glimpsed something that chilled him to his core. Visions of destruction, death, and a masked figure standing amid the ruins of everything Luke had built. The darkness he sensed in Ben was growing stronger, and for the first time, Luke Skywalker, the man who had seen the good in Darth Vader himself, began to doubt whether he could save his nephew from the pull of the dark side. The academy on Ossus was thriving, with 24 students ranging from children to young adults. From the outside, Luke's project to restore the Jedi Order seemed successful, yet its foundations were cracking. His prized student, the heir to the Skywalker legacy, was slipping away. Ben Solo's path toward becoming the feared Kylo Ren had begun, and neither master nor apprentice fully grasped how close they were to the breaking point that would forever alter both their destinies. Sometimes a single moment can change everything. For Ben Solo, that moment came in 28 ABY, when he was 23 years old. The galaxy's political machine, always hungry for scandal, unearthed a secret that the Skywalker family had carefully guarded for decades. During a heated Senate session, one of Leia Organa's political rivals revealed to the entire New Republic what she had kept hidden her entire public life. Leia was the daughter of Darth Vader. The news spread across the galaxy like wildfire. For most, it was shocking gossip. For Ben Solo, it was an earthquake that destroyed the foundation of his identity. Everything he believed about his family suddenly appeared as lies. His grandfather wasn't merely Anakin Skywalker, the heroic Jedi Knight from stories Luke had shared. He was Darth Vader, the galaxy's most feared enforcer, the armored nightmare who had helped crush the Republic and establish the Empire. This revelation devastated the Organa Solo family in ways both public and deeply personal. Leia, horrified at being permanently linked to Vader's legacy, resigned from the Senate in disgrace. The political movement she had built crumbled overnight. Han, unable to cope with the family crisis, retreated to what he knew best, returning to smuggling and life among the stars. Their marriage, already strained by years of separate careers and Ben's difficult upbringing, couldn't withstand this final blow. But no one suffered more than Ben. The secret they had kept from him felt like the ultimate betrayal. Why had they hidden this truth? The answer seemed clear to him. They had feared what lived inside him from the beginning. The dark impulses he had struggled to suppress throughout his life, the power that sometimes frightened even Luke, suddenly made perfect sense. This wasn't weakness or failure. This was inheritance. This was who he truly was, and his family had denied him this knowledge, this understanding of himself. In this moment of vulnerability, Snoke seized his opportunity. Having manipulated Ben from the shadows since childhood, he now emerged as a guide, offering perspective and validation when Ben felt most betrayed. Through their telepathic connection, Snoke painted Ben's family as hypocrites. Luke Skywalker, the legendary Jedi who had supposedly seen good in Darth Vader, hadn't trusted his own nephew with the truth of his lineage. Snoke suggested a liberating possibility. What if Ben stopped trying to live up to the impossible standards of Skywalker legend and instead embraced the power his grandfather had wielded? The idea took root. Where once Ben had felt shame about his darker impulses, Snoke encouraged pride. Where he had seen his strength as something to control, Snoke framed it as something to unleash. The scarred, mysterious figure promised that together they could create something greater than Vader had ever accomplished. Ben would not simply continue a legacy, he would surpass it. Luke Skywalker sensed the change in his nephew. The darkness that had always lingered at the edges of Ben's Force signature now grew stronger each day. Concerned and desperate to prevent another fall like his father's, Luke made a decision that would haunt him for years. One night, while Ben slept in his hut at the Jedi Temple, Luke stood over his nephew and reached out with the Force, probing the young man's mind. What he found terrified him. Visions of death and destruction, the fall of everything Luke had built, countless lives extinguished. In a moment of pure instinct, Luke activated his lightsaber, briefly considering the unthinkable, ending the threat before it could begin. The impulse passed almost instantly, replaced by shame at even considering such an act. But it was too late. Ben awoke to find his master, his uncle, standing over him with a glowing lightsaber. In that shocking moment, all of Snoke's whispers crystallized into certainty. His family feared him. They wanted to destroy him. Luke's hesitation meant nothing to Ben, who saw only betrayal in the green glow illuminating his uncle's conflicted face. Acting on instinct and raw fear, Ben reached out with the Force and collapsed the hut around Luke. But his rage didn't stop there. Years of suppressed emotion, betrayal, and pain erupted like a volcano. The night sky above the temple filled with storm clouds as Ben's fury manifested in the Force. Lightning struck the ancient temple structures, winds tore at the training grounds, and fire spread through the dormitories where other students slept. The destruction was swift and devastating. Many of Luke's students died that night, caught in the storm of Ben's unleashed power. It wasn't a calculated massacre, but a cataclysm of emotion, the result of a young man's lifetime of feeling misunderstood and betrayed, finally exploding outward with terrible consequences. When Hennix, Tai, and Vo returned to the academy from an off-world mission, they found only smoking ruins. At first, they believed Ben might also be a victim, but soon discovered him standing amid the destruction. When confronted, Ben told them the truth as he saw it. Luke Skywalker had tried to murder him in his sleep. The three students, loyal to their master, refused to accept this explanation and attacked Ben together. The fight was brief but intense. Though outnumbered, Ben's raw power and combat skills easily overwhelmed his former classmates. They had always trailed behind his abilities during training, and now the gap between them became painfully clear. Yet even in this dark moment, Ben showed restraint. Rather than killing them immediately, he subdued them and offered them a choice: join him or stay loyal to the master who had betrayed them all. When they refused, Ben left them behind, escaping in his personal ship, the Grimtash. The confrontation revealed something important. Despite his rage and sense of betrayal, he still hesitated to kill those who had once been his companions. The light within him hadn't been completely extinguished. Adrift and consumed by conflicting emotions, Ben sought out the only guide he felt he had left: Snoke. In his fortress in the unknown regions, Snoke received the young man with open arms, praising his power and the choice he had made to break from his past. During their conversations, Ben expressed a desire to shed his birth name. Ben Solo tied him to legends he could never live up to, To a family that had lied to him, to expectations that had crushed him, he needed something new. Snoke suggested that Ben seek out the Knights of Ren, a group of Force-sensitive warriors who operated outside the restrictions of Jedi or Sith ideologies. They could offer a brotherhood Ben had never found among Luke's students, and a path to power unrestrained by Jedi limitations. The destruction of Luke's temple sent shockwaves through the Force and through what remained of the Solo family. Leia felt her son's choice the moment it happened, a pain greater than any political humiliation. Han received the news with stunned disbelief, unable to reconcile the image of their son with the destruction he had caused. Their different approaches to grief drove them further apart. Leia blamed herself for sending Ben to Luke in the first place, while Han felt powerless, lacking the Force connection that might have helped him understand his son's struggles. Luke Skywalker, having survived the collapsed hut, emerged to find his life's work in ruins. The new Jedi Order he had spent decades building was gone in a single night. Overwhelmed by guilt and shame, Luke chose exile, disappearing to the remote world of Ahch-To, where the first Jedi Temple stood. There, he would grapple with his failure and eventually cut himself off from the Force entirely, unable to bear feeling the consequences of what his momentary lapse in judgment had caused. Meanwhile, Ben Solo journeyed toward a transformation that would complete his break from the past. The frightened, betrayed young man was taking his first steps toward becoming someone new, someone terrifying, someone named Kylo Ren. Identity isn't something you find, it's something you forge. Having rejected his place among the Jedi, Ben Solo needed to become someone else, someone unburdened by the Skywalker legacy. His search for a new purpose led him to the Knights of Ren, a group of warriors who had operated in the shadows for centuries. The Knights weren't Sith, nor were they Jedi. Originating from the unknown regions of the galaxy, these Force-sensitive mercenaries followed their own code, referring to the dark side simply as the Shadow. They existed outside the ancient rivalry between light and dark, taking what they wanted and answering to no one. To a young man who felt betrayed by rigid ideologies, their freedom was magnetic. Their leader, who called himself simply Ren, was a masked warrior wielding an ancient red-bladed lightsaber. Upon meeting Ben, he sensed the raw power flowing through the former Jedi student. But joining the Knights required more than potential. It demanded proof of commitment. Ren explained that Ben would need to make a significant kill as a sacrifice, a demonstration that he had truly abandoned the Jedi path of compassion and restraint. While Ben contemplated this requirement, his past caught up with him. Hennix, Tai, and Vo, the surviving students from Luke's temple, had tracked him to the Knight's location on Mimban. They hadn't given up on bringing their former fellow student to justice for what they believed was his betrayal and destruction of the Jedi Academy. The confrontation on Mimban's mud-soaked surface marked a turning point. Tai, always the most insightful of Luke's students, attempted to reach the humanity still flickering within Ben. For a moment, his words seemed to penetrate the walls Ben had built around himself. This display of compassion might have been enough to pull Ben back from the brink, but Ren, seeing the hesitation in his potential recruit, intervened drastically. With a casual brutality that shocked even Ben, Ren killed Tai, eliminating the voice of compassion that threatened to derail Ben's dark journey. Something snapped inside Ben Solo. The murder of Tai, who had shown him nothing but understanding, ignited a rage unlike anything he had experienced before. But this anger wasn't directed at himself or his family legacy. It focused entirely on Ren. Drawing his blue-bladed lightsaber, Ben challenged the knight to combat. What followed wasn't merely a duel, but a transformation. As Ben clashed with Ren, he finally surrendered to the dark emotions he had fought his entire life. Lightning crackled in the sky above Mimban, mirroring the storm raging within him. This disturbance in the Force rippled across the galaxy, felt by those connected to Ben. Leia Organa sensed her son's final plunge into darkness and wept. Snoke perceived his pupil's embrace of the shadow and smiled. And somewhere in the unknown parts of the galaxy, the consciousness of Darth Sidious, the puppet master behind Snoke, recognized that another piece of his grand design had fallen into place. The battle ended decisively. Ben killed Ren, claiming both victory and leadership of the Knights, as their tradition demanded. The succession through combat completed his initial sacrifice, but Ben wasn't finished. Returning to where Vo and Hennix waited, he confronted his former classmates one final time. Taking Ren's lightsaber, he killed Vo, driving the crimson blade through her chest. The act severed his last connections to Luke's academy and completed his fall to the dark side. With his position among the Knights secured, Ben took the next step in crafting his new identity. The lightsaber he had built as a Jedi represented a past he now rejected, yet he couldn't simply discard it. Instead, he performed an ancient dark side ritual rarely seen in the galaxy, bleeding a Kyber crystal. Kyber crystals, the living Force-attuned gems at the heart of all lightsabers, naturally resonated with the light side. To bend one to the dark side required forcing one's pain, hatred, and anger into the crystal until its alignment changed. Ben poured all his resentment toward his family, all his rage at being lied to about Vader, all his pain from years of feeling abandoned into his crystal. The process was unlike anything described in Jedi texts. As Ben channeled his darkness into the crystal, it fought back, resisting corruption. The struggle between Ben's will and the crystal's nature became so intense that the crystal finally cracked under the pressure, unable to fully surrender to the dark side without breaking. This fractured state mirrored Ben's own soul, still torn despite his embrace of the shadow. The crystal's transformation from blue to a fiery, unstable red necessitated a completely new lightsaber design. Ben constructed a hilt with lateral vents to channel the excess energy generated by the damaged crystal. The result was a weapon as volatile as its wielder, a cross-guard lightsaber with a main blade flanked by two smaller plasma streams that served as both exhaust ports and additional weapons. The irregular, flickering quality of the blade reflected the turmoil still raging within its creator, a visible manifestation of internal conflict. With his weapon reforged, Ben needed one final element to complete his transformation, a name worthy of his new path. Shedding Ben Solo, he adopted the title Kylo Ren, combining the Kai from Skywalker with Lo from Solo, then adding Ren to signify his leadership of the Knights. This naming choice revealed something crucial. Even as he rejected his family, parts of their legacy remained embedded in his identity, impossible to fully excise. To complete his transformation, Kylo crafted a mask patterned after the Knights of Ren's battle gear. This helmet served multiple purposes beyond merely concealing his face. It connected him visually to the legacy of his grandfather, Darth Vader, whom he now idolized after learning of their connection. It helped hide his youth and relative inexperience, presenting a more intimidating figure to both allies and enemies. Perhaps most importantly, it contained a vocal modifier that lowered his voice considerably, masking any uncertainty that might betray his continuing inner conflict. The mask became a literal barrier between Ben Solo and the galaxy, allowing him to separate his past self from the figure he now presented to the world. Behind its black metal, he could hide any flickers of doubt, any moments of weakness, any trace of the light still fighting for survival within him. The Knights of Ren, now under Kylo's command, operated throughout the galaxy's shadows, taking what they desired and eliminating those who stood in their way. They became feared mercenaries, their reputation growing with each mission. Yet, they were about to be elevated from mere marauders to something with far greater purpose. Snoke, observing Kylo's transformation with satisfaction, began integrating him and his knights into the emerging First Order. This military junta, risen from the ashes of the fallen Empire, represented the next stage in Kylo's dark journey. No longer would he simply be a knight roaming the galaxy. He would become a leader in a movement destined to overthrow the new republic his mother had helped build. The transformation from Ben Solo to Kylo Ren was complete, at least on the surface. The son of heroes had become a figure of darkness. The boy who once trained to restore the Jedi Order now stood ready to extinguish its last embers. The child who had felt abandoned by his family had abandoned them in turn, trading their name and legacy for power and a new brotherhood among the knights. Yet beneath the mask, behind the cracked and fiery blade, inside the heart of the warrior now called Kylo Ren, the light hadn't been completely extinguished. It remained dormant, waiting for something or someone to awaken it again. The completeness of his transformation was an illusion he presented to the galaxy and to himself. The truth was more complex, more fragile, and infinitely more interesting than the fearsome mask would suggest. Power isn't given, it's taken, and power through the dark side must be earned through suffering. As Kylo Ren began his training under Supreme Leader Snoke, he discovered just how different this education would be from his years with Luke Skywalker. Snoke's methods were deliberately brutal, designed to strip away weakness and forge strength through pain. On a desolate, rocky planet in the Ra'lich system, Snoke demonstrated this philosophy with terrifying clarity. Without warning, he used the Force to push his new apprentice off a sheer cliff face. As Kylo plummeted toward certain death, Snoke's voice echoed in his mind. Turn fear into anger, turn anger into power. It was only by channeling his rage and tapping into the raw energy of the dark side that Kylo managed to slow his fall and survive the impact. Where Luke had taught patience and control, Snoke taught that suffering was the path to true strength. These harsh lessons continued across the galaxy. In a particularly meaningful test, Snoke brought Kylo to Dagobah, to the same cave of evil where Luke Skywalker had once faced his own demons decades earlier. Inside this nexus of dark side energy, Kylo confronted apparitions of those who had shaped his journey: Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, and Leia Organa. His reaction revealed volumes about his internal state. When faced with the vision of Luke, Kylo struck without hesitation, his lightsaber cutting through the Phantom with savage satisfaction. But when confronted by the images of his parents, his resolve faltered. Despite his embrace of the dark side, despite his new identity, something within him could not bring himself to symbolically murder Han and Leia. This hesitation infuriated him. After leaving the cave, Kylo unleashed his frustration on the surrounding swamp, destroying trees and boiling water with his lightsaber, as if trying to erase the evidence of his own weakness. While his training progressed, Kylo developed an obsession with his grandfather's legacy. He recovered Darth Vader's charred helmet from the funeral pyre on Endor, creating a shrine where he would commune with what remained of the Sith Lord. In these private moments, Kylo would confess his doubts and seek guidance from the twisted metal that had once encased Anakin Skywalker's scarred face. Kylo viewed his grandfather's story through a distorted lens. To him, Vader's return to the light side in his final moments wasn't a redemption, but a momentary weakness, a failure that had prevented the Sith Lord from achieving his true potential. By holding on to this interpretation, Kylo could justify his own dark path as completing what Vader had started. This selective understanding of history became central to his identity, allowing him to frame his actions not as a betrayal of his family, but as loyalty to his true lineage. As Snoke's apprentice, Kylo Ren was integrated into the leadership of the First Order. His position was unique, mirroring the role his grandfather had played decades earlier. Like Vader, Kylo operated outside the standard chain of command, answering only to the Supreme Leader. His authority came not from rank, but from fear, as officers quickly learned that questioning the masked warrior often ended in suffering or death. This arrangement created natural tensions within the First Order hierarchy. Chief among Kylo's rivals was General Armitage Hux, a young, ambitious officer whose rapid rise through the ranks paralleled Kylo's own ascent. Where Kylo represented the mystical aspects of the First Order, Hux embodied its cold, technological might. Their contrasting approaches to power created a volatile dynamic as both men competed for Snoke's approval. Hux viewed Kylo's Force abilities with a mixture of skepticism and envy, considering them archaic superstitions, yet resenting their effectiveness. Kylo, in turn, looked down on Hux's rigid military mindset, seeing it as limited and unimaginative. Their rivalry became a defining feature of First Order leadership, with each man constantly seeking to undermine the other while maintaining a veneer of cooperation. Snoke deliberately fostered this competition, understanding that their mutual antagonism pushed both men to greater achievements in their desperate bids for his favor. It was a manipulation tactic straight from Palpatine's playbook, though neither Kylo nor Hux recognized how they were being played against each other. As the First Order expanded its reach across the galaxy, Kylo Ren became Snoke's enforcer, dispatched to handle situations that required more than military might. When the planet Caraxes refused to submit to First Order authority, Kylo and Hux were sent to make an example of its leadership. Their contrasting methods highlighted their fundamental differences. While Hux favored public executions and displays of military force, Kylo used the dark side to inflict terror more directly, using forced torture to extract information and break resistance. The local government surrendered within hours of their arrival, another world added to the First Order's growing territory. These missions honed Kylo's skills and reputation, but none would prove as significant as his confrontation with the Benethi. This warrior species had once faced Darth Vader himself, who failed to fully subjugate them decades earlier. When they resisted First Order expansion, Snoke saw an opportunity to test his apprentice against his grandfather's shadow. Upon arrival, Kylo faced King Kristoff, the Benethi ruler, who proudly recounted how his people had stood against Vader. Rather than negotiating, Kylo immediately executed the king, making it clear that the First Order would accept nothing less than total submission. This act of casual brutality triggered the Benethi's final defense, a massive Zillo beast they worshipped as a god. The creature, towering over the battlefield, had repelled Vader's forces generations ago. But where his grandfather had failed, Kylo succeeded. Using both his lightsaber and the full extent of his dark side powers, he slaughtered the beast before the horrified eyes of the Benethi population. The message was unmistakable. Resistance against the First Order was futile, and Kylo Ren was not merely Vader's heir, but potentially his superior. This victory marked a turning point in Kylo's development. For the first time, he had definitively stepped out of Vader's shadow, accomplishing something his grandfather could not. Snoke praised this achievement, fueling Kylo's growing confidence and cementing his position within the First Order hierarchy. Yet, for all his apparent progress, Kylo remained haunted by internal conflict. His failure in the Cave of Evil on Dagobah was not an isolated incident. Throughout his training, moments of doubt surfaced, flickers of the light still fighting for survival within him. During meditation, he sometimes sensed his mother's presence through the Force, a connection he could never fully sever despite his efforts. Snoke recognized these struggles and often mocked Kylo for them. He derided the young man's attachment to Vader's helmet as childish emulation, questioned his need to hide behind a mask, and cruelly highlighted moments of weakness. This psychological warfare was calculated to keep Kylo off balance, to prevent him from recognizing his own potential and possibly challenging Snoke's authority. What neither Kylo nor Snoke openly acknowledged was the truth behind their relationship. Snoke, for all his apparent power and wisdom, was himself a puppet, a creation and proxy of the supposedly dead Emperor Palpatine. From his hidden base on Exegol, Palpatine had orchestrated Snoke's mentorship of Kylo, seeing the Skywalker heir as a powerful tool in his long-term plan to reclaim control of the galaxy. Through Snoke, Palpatine shaped Kylo's development, ensuring he grew powerful enough to be useful, but keeping him unstable enough to remain controllable. The harsh training, the psychological manipulation, the deliberately fostered rivalry with Hux, all served Palpatine's ultimate goal of creating a worthy vessel for his influence. As Kylo Ren continued his rise within the First Order, this hidden truth remained beyond his perception. He believed himself to be forging his own path, stepping out of the shadows of both Skywalker and Vader legacies to create something new. The reality was far more complex. Even as he rejected his parents and murdered his former master's students, even as he commanded First Order troops and slaughtered those who resisted it, Kylo Ren remained a pawn in a game far larger than he imagined, moved across the board by hands he could not see. Legends cast long shadows. For the First Order, no shadow loomed larger than that of Luke Skywalker. Though the last Jedi had vanished years ago, his mere existence represented a threat that neither Kylo Ren nor Supreme Leader Snoke could ignore. As long as Skywalker lived, the possibility remained that he might return, train new Jedi, and inspire resistance against their growing power. the search for Skywalker became an obsession for the First Order, particularly for Kylo Ren. Finding and eliminating his former master would serve multiple purposes: removing a strategic threat, exacting personal revenge, and perhaps silencing the voice of doubt that still whispered to him during moments of weakness. The hunt intensified when intelligence reports indicated that a vital piece of information had surfaced in the galaxy, a fragment of a map leading to Skywalker's location. This crucial piece of the puzzle had fallen into the hands of Lor San Tekka, an elderly explorer and member of the Church of the Force. San Tekka's history with Skywalker ran deep. In the years following the Empire's defeat, he had accompanied Luke on expeditions across the galaxy, searching for Jedi artifacts and ancient knowledge. Their shared journeys had taken them to remote worlds, where fragments of Jedi wisdom had survived the Emperor's purge. San Tekka's expertise had proven invaluable in locating the first Jedi temple on Ahch-To, the very place where Luke had ultimately retreated into exile. First Order intelligence tracked San Tekka to Jakku, a remote desert planet in the western reaches. Kylo Ren personally led the mission to recover the map, commanding a full assault team of stormtroopers. Their target was Tuanul, a small spiritual settlement where San Tekka had taken refuge. Under cover of night, First Order transports descended on the village, and what followed was less a battle than a massacre. The confrontation between Kylo Ren and Lor San Tekka revealed much about both men. Even faced with certain death, the elderly explorer showed no fear. When Kylo demanded the map, San Tekka refused, calmly stating that the First Order had risen from the dark side and would not intimidate him. What happened next struck at Kylo's core identity. San Tekka, who knew exactly who stood behind the black mask, reminded him of his true heritage, speaking the birth name Kylo had tried so hard to bury. The mention of Ben Solo triggered something primal in Kylo. With a swift stroke of his crackling red lightsaber, he cut down the old man, silencing not just San Tekka, but the uncomfortable truth he represented. This killing marked a significant moment in Kylo's journey, another attempt to sever connections to his past through violence. The mission on Jakku took an unexpected turn when Resistance pilot Poe Dameron witnessed the execution. Before being captured, Dameron had hidden the map fragment in his astromech droid, BB-8, sending the small unit rolling into the desert with the vital information. When stormtroopers brought the pilot before him, Kylo demonstrated abilities that had made him feared throughout the galaxy. Mind probing, a specialized force technique, allowed Kylo to extract information directly from a subject's thoughts. The process was invasive and excruciating for the victim, essentially a form of mental violation. While Poe initially resisted, his defenses ultimately crumbled under Kylo's relentless assault. The location of the map was revealed, a BB unit, likely still somewhere on Jakku. The situation deteriorated further when a stormtrooper designated FN-2-187, later known as Finn, defected and helped Dameron escape. The pair fled Jakku in a stolen TIE fighter, crashing back on the planet's surface. Although Dameron was presumed dead in the crash, Finn survived and eventually encountered a scavenger named Rey, who had unknowingly crossed paths with the droid carrying the map. When reports reached Kylo that the droid had escaped Jakku aboard a freighter, his reaction revealed a personal connection to the vessel. The ship was none other than the Millennium Falcon, his father's prized possession. The mention of this ship from his childhood triggered a burst of rage, one powerful enough to destroy equipment around him with his lightsaber. This emotional outburst hinted at the conflict still raging within Kylo, as objects from his past continued to evoke intense reactions. The search led to Takodana, where intelligence placed the Falcon, the droid, and its new companions. Kylo led the assault personally, arriving to find the Resistance already extracting the droid. During the chaos of battle, he encountered Rey in the forest. Sensing something unusual about the scavenger, he froze her in place with the Force and discovered she had seen the map. Rather than continuing the search for the droid, Kylo made a tactical decision, rendering Rey unconscious and taking her to Starkiller Base for interrogation. What followed surprised even Kylo. As he attempted to probe Rey's mind, he met resistance unlike anything he had experienced before. Where Poe Dameron had eventually broken under his mental intrusion, Rey not only withstood the probe, but somehow reversed it, glimpsing Kylo's own innermost fears, including his terror of never matching Darth Vader's power. This unexpected connection between them would prove significant in ways neither could imagine at the time. The Resistance mounted a desperate attack on Starkiller Base to rescue Rey and destroy the superweapon before it could target their headquarters. In the midst of this chaos came the moment that would define Kylo Ren's path forward. A confrontation with his father, Han Solo. Their meeting on a narrow bridge spanning a vast shaft inside the base carried enormous emotional weight. Han approached his son openly, without weapons, calling him by his birth name. For a moment, the mask of Kylo Ren slipped, revealing glimpses of Ben Solo underneath. He confessed to being torn apart, pulled between light and darkness. When Han offered to help him, a flicker of possibility opened, a path back to the light. That path closed with the ignition of a lightsaber. In what he believed would be his final test, his complete commitment to the dark side, Kylo impaled his father on his crackling red blade. As the life faded from Han's eyes, the older man reached up one last time to touch his son's face before falling into the abyss below. The act that Kylo thought would strengthen his resolve had the opposite effect. Rather than eliminating his inner conflict, killing Han Solo intensified it. The deed left him spiritually wounded, more unbalanced than before. This weakness manifested physically when Chewbacca, enraged at witnessing his oldest friend's murder, fired his bowcaster at Kylo, leaving him bleeding and wounded as he pursued Rey and Finn into the snowy forest outside. Despite his injury, Kylo easily overpowered Finn, who had taken up Anakin Skywalker's old lightsaber in defense of Rey. The former stormtrooper fought bravely but was quickly outmatched by even a wounded Kylo, suffering a severe spinal injury before being knocked unconscious. When Kylo reached out to claim his grandfather's lightsaber, however, the weapon flew past him into Rey's outstretched hand instead. The ensuing duel revealed Rey's surprising affinity for lightsaber combat. As Starkiller Base literally crumbled around them, she tapped into the Force in a way she never had before. Drawing on something awakening within her, Rey turned the tide of battle, eventually slashing Kylo across the face, leaving him with a scar that would become a permanent reminder of his defeat. Only the planet's sudden structural collapse separated them, allowing Kylo to be evacuated by First Order forces while Rey escaped with Finn. In the aftermath of this devastating failure, Kylo faced Supreme Leader Snoke's wrath. Having lost not only the map to Skywalker, but also Starkiller Base itself, Kylo stood before his master, a diminished figure. Snoke did not hold back his contempt, mocking Kylo as a failed apprentice, a child in a mask playing at power. The Supreme Leader's harshest criticism centered on what he perceived as the fundamental flaw in Kylo's decision to kill Han Solo. Rather than strengthening his connection to the dark side, the act had left him weaker, more conflicted, less certain of his path. The search for Skywalker had ended in comprehensive failure. The map was now in Resistance hands, Starkiller Base was destroyed, and Kylo Ren had been defeated in combat by an untrained scavenger. Yet these setbacks, painful as they were, represented not an ending, but a turning point. The events on Starkiller Base had changed something fundamental in Kylo Ren, creating fissures in his dark side persona that would eventually grow into cracks, challenging his identity in ways he could not yet comprehend. Power often arrives differently than expected. Kylo Ren had spent years training under Snoke, imagining a distant day when he might claim leadership of the First Order. Yet when that moment finally came, it happened through impulse rather than planning, through protection rather than ambition. In the aftermath of the Starkiller Base disaster, the First Order regrouped and pursued the fleeing Resistance fleet across the galaxy. During this chase, something extraordinary began happening between Kylo and Rey. Despite being on opposite sides of the conflict and separated by vast distances, they suddenly found themselves able to see each other, speak to each other, and eventually even physically interact across space. These force connections occurred randomly and without warning. One moment, Kylo would be alone. The next, Rey would appear before him as clearly as if she were in the same room. During these intimate encounters, their antagonism gradually gave way to curiosity and even understanding. Rey, who had witnessed Han Solo's murder firsthand, began seeing glimpses of Ben Solo beneath the mask of Kylo Ren. Kylo, in turn, sensed Rey's loneliness and abandonment issues that mirrored his own childhood pain. Supreme Leader Snoke later claimed credit for creating this mental bridge between them, boasting it was part of his manipulation. He had recognized the potential of their connection and exploited it, using Rey's growing sympathy for Kylo to lure her into a trap. When Resistance ships were being destroyed one by one, Rey made the fateful decision to surrender herself to the First Order, believing she could turn Kylo back to the light side. Brought before Snoke in his Crimson Throne Room aboard the Mega-class Star Dreadnought Supremacy, Rey faced the full, intimidating presence of the Supreme Leader. The disfigured Force user towered over her, demonstrating his power by invading her mind and torturing her for information about Luke Skywalker. Throughout this ordeal, Kylo knelt nearby, his expression unreadable behind his mask. Then came the moment that would reshape the galaxy. Snoke, believing he had complete control over his apprentice, ordered Kylo to execute Rey. He placed her lightsaber on the arm of his throne and commanded Kylo to fulfill his training by killing his most significant emotional attachment. What Snoke failed to realize was that his constant belittling, his manipulation, and his cruelty had created not loyalty, but resentment in his apprentice. As Kylo raised his hand, he used the Force not to activate his own weapon, but to rotate Rey's lightsaber on the throne's armrest, pointing it directly at his master. Before Snoke could react, Kylo ignited the blade remotely, bisecting the Supreme Leader through his midsection. In that single, decisive act, Kylo both saved Rey and eliminated the master who had manipulated him since childhood. What followed demonstrated the strange bond that had formed between Kylo and Rey. Without exchanging a word, they stood back to back against Snoke's elite Praetorian guards, 8 warriors in crimson armor trained to fight Force users. Moving in perfect synchronization, they battled these skilled opponents throughout the throne room. Despite never having fought together before, their movements complemented each other flawlessly, as if they had trained side by side for years. This remarkable cooperation revealed the deeper nature of their connection, something far more significant than Snoke's manipulations could explain. With the guards defeated and Snoke dead, Kylo extended his hand to Rey with an unexpected proposal. He asked her to join him, not to continue the First Order as it existed, but to create something entirely new. He spoke of letting old things die, of moving beyond the ancient conflict between Jedi and Sith, beyond the cycle of rebellion and oppression that had defined galactic politics for generations. In this moment, Kylo revealed his true vision, not to rule as Snoke had, not to become another Darth Vader, but to break free from the patterns that had trapped his family for 3 generations. Despite this emotional appeal, Rey refused. She could not abandon her friends in the Resistance, who were still under attack. Their momentary alliance shattered as they struggled for possession of Anakin Skywalker's lightsaber, their conflicting force pulls eventually causing the weapon to break in 2, just as a massive explosion rocked the supremacy. When General Hux arrived in the throne room to find Snoke dead and Kylo unconscious, he initially considered killing his rival. But Kylo awoke before Hux could act, immediately claiming the title of Supreme Leader. When Hux hesitated to acknowledge this self-promotion, Kylo demonstrated his authority by force, choking the general into submission. This quick, violent assertion of dominance established the new hierarchy without room for debate. Kylo's first act as Supreme Leader was to order all available forces to the mineral planet Crate, where the last Resistance fighters had taken shelter in an abandoned rebel base. His determination to eliminate the opposition, particularly after Rey's rejection, showed a hardening of his resolve to embrace his chosen path. On Crate's white salt flats, Kylo led the First Order assault personally, commanding a line of ATM-6 walkers and a massive siege cannon designed to breach the Resistance's fortified doors. When a lone X-Wing fighter approached across the salt plains, Kylo ordered all weapons to fire on it, his emotional control fracturing at the sight of the man who had once betrayed him in his sleep, Luke Skywalker. Miraculously surviving the barrage, Luke stood alone against the First Order's might. Kylo descended to face his former master personally, his rage overwhelming his tactical judgment. Their confrontation revealed Kylo's continuing emotional wounds. He attacked Luke with unrestrained fury, only to discover too late that he was fighting a force projection, an image Luke was maintaining from Ahch-To across the galaxy. This deception allowed the remaining Resistance members to escape, while Kylo wasted time and resources on a phantom. The realization that he had been outmaneuvered by Luke one final time left Kylo kneeling in defeat as the Millennium Falcon carried the Resistance survivors away. This public humiliation before his troops complicated his new leadership position from the outset. In the months that followed, Kylo worked to consolidate his power within the First Order. He instituted harsh policies against any world suspected of Resistance sympathy. When intelligence suggested Resistance fighters had passed through the Fondor system, Kylo ordered a full military occupation of the planet, dismissing local officials' claims that they held no allegiance to the insurgents. This zero-tolerance approach spread fear across the galaxy, deterring other systems from offering even tacit support to General Organa's movement. To better manage the military machine he now commanded, Kylo formed the Supreme Council, a governing body consisting of the highest-ranking First Order officers. This group included Allegiant General Pride, an older Imperial veteran who had served under Kylo's grandfather, General Hux, whose resentment continued to simmer beneath a veneer of obedience, Admiral Griss, who commanded the naval forces, and Generals Engel, Parnadi, and Quinn, each overseeing different aspects of First Order operations. The Supreme Council represented Kylo's attempt to create a leadership structure that could function despite the competing ambitions of its members. By bringing these powerful figures together, he could monitor their loyalties while maintaining central authority. This approach differed significantly from Snoke's more isolated and mysterious leadership style. Despite these outward displays of authoritarian control, Kylo's internal conflict persisted. The Force connection with Rey continued even after Snoke's death, suggesting their bond was natural rather than artificially created. These unexpected moments of connection kept the possibility of redemption alive, a constant reminder of the choice he had made and the alternative path that remained theoretically open to him. Kylo's leadership style reflected his volatile nature. Where Snoke had been calculating and patient, Kylo ruled through intimidation and emotional outbursts. His unpredictability created tension throughout the First Order hierarchy, with officers never knowing when an equipment malfunction or disappointing report might trigger a destructive lightsaber tantrum. The title of Supreme Leader gave Kylo the authority he had sought, but it failed to provide the clarity or purpose he had hoped would come with such power. Having achieved the position, he found that ruling the galaxy offered no resolution to his fundamental identity crisis. The throne he had claimed through violence and betrayal proved to be just another stage in his journey, not its destination. The dead speak. Those three words changed everything when a mysterious broadcast echoed across the galaxy in 35 ABY. The voice belonged to Emperor Palpatine, supposedly killed decades earlier aboard the second Death Star. This shocking revelation upended the fragile balance of power and set Kylo Ren on the final phase of his complex journey. Determined to eliminate any threat to his authority, Kylo immediately began searching for the source of the transmission. His quest led him first to Mustafar, the volcanic world where his grandfather Darth Vader had established his fortress. There, among rivers of molten lava, Kylo cut a swathe of destruction through the alasmic of Winsit, cultists who had settled on Mustafar to protect the dark legacy of Vader. After slaughtering the cultists, Kylo recovered a Sith Wayfinder, an ancient pyramidal device capable of navigating the treacherous routes to hidden Sith worlds. This artifact led him to Exegol, a forgotten planet in the unknown regions, shrouded in perpetual darkness and storm clouds. What he discovered there shook the foundation of everything he believed about his own journey to power. In the cavernous depths of a massive Sith citadel, Kylo came face to face with Palpatine himself, or rather, what remained of him. The former Emperor existed in a decayed semi-corpse state, sustained by arcane Sith technology and dark side energies. This nightmarish figure revealed a truth that changed Kylo's understanding of his entire life. Supreme Leader Snoke had been nothing more than a puppet, a creation engineered by Palpatine to manipulate Kylo from the shadows. Every voice Kylo had heard in his head since childhood, every push toward the dark side, had ultimately originated from Palpatine. The Emperor had been the architect of Ben Solo's fall, orchestrating his transformation into Kylo Ren as part of a generations-spanning scheme to restore Sith rule to the galaxy. This revelation might have broken a lesser person, but Kylo maintained his composure. When Palpatine unveiled a massive hidden fleet of Star Destroyers, each equipped with planet-destroying weapons, Kylo saw an opportunity. The Emperor offered him this Final Order armada on one condition: he must kill Rey, the last Jedi. To sweeten this deadly request, Palpatine revealed another shocking truth. Rey was his granddaughter, making her a Palpatine by blood, heir to a dark legacy parallel to Kylo's own Skywalker heritage. Rather than feeling threatened by this revelation, Kylo saw it as leverage. He had no intention of serving Palpatine, but the knowledge of Rey's lineage gave him a new angle to persuade her to join him. Through their Force bond, Kylo tracked Rey to Pasaana, where she and her friends were searching for another Sith wayfinder. During this pursuit, Kylo revealed the true nature of their connection to Rey. They formed a dyad in the Force, two beings who were essentially one in the Force, a power unseen for generations. Their bond allowed them not just to communicate across vast distances, but to physically interact, despite being worlds apart. This rare connection explained their ability to fight in perfect unison against Snoke's guards and their continued mental link even after Snoke's death. The dyad represented a power so great that Palpatine himself coveted it, though neither Rey nor Kylo fully understood its significance yet. The chase continued to Kijimi, where Kylo confronted Rey with the truth about her Palpatine bloodline, hoping to destabilize her sense of identity, just as the revelation about Vader had once shattered his own. Throughout these encounters, Kylo continued urging Rey to join him, to embrace their dyad and rule together. Despite their antagonistic relationship, a current of understanding and even intimacy flowed between them, complicating their conflict. Their pursuits culminated on Kef Bir, among the half-submerged ruins of the second Death Star. There, surrounded by crashing waves and twisted metal, they engaged in what would become their final duel as adversaries. Their lightsabers clashed amid the wreckage of the Empire, a fitting backdrop for two people grappling with legacies of darkness. As the battle reached its climax, with Kylo gaining the upper hand and preparing to strike Rey down, something extraordinary happened. Across the galaxy, Leia Organa, sensing her son's moment of decision, used her remaining life force to reach out to him through the Force. This final act of maternal love, this choosing to see her son rather than the monster he had become, hit Kylo with the force of a physical blow. In that moment of distraction and vulnerability, Rey seized the opportunity and impaled Kylo with his own lightsaber. But as he collapsed, something shifted between them. Rey, feeling Leia's death ripple through the Force and sharing in Kylo's sudden grief, made a choice that would alter both their destinies. Instead of leaving him to die, she placed her hand over his fatal wound and transferred her Force energy to him, healing him completely. Before departing, Rey made a confession that cut to the heart of their complex relationship. She admitted that she had wanted to take Ben Solo's hand when he offered it, not Kylo Ren's. This distinction, This recognition of the man beneath the monster planted the final seed for Ben's return. Left alone amid the ruins and the raging sea, Kylo Ren faced the emptiness of his chosen path. The death of his mother, following years after the death of his father by his own hand, stripped away the anger that had fueled him for so long. In this moment of clarity, he experienced a vision, a memory, or perhaps something in between. Han Solo appeared before him, not as a Force ghost, but as a manifestation of Ben's own conscience. The conversation that followed was really Ben Solo talking to himself, working through his guilt, his pain, and his fear. It ended with a decision that had been years in the making. With a single decisive gesture, he hurled his cross-guard lightsaber into the churning ocean below, symbolically casting off the identity of Kylo Ren and reclaiming his true self, Ben Solo. This transformation was more than a change of heart. It represented the culmination of the conflict that had torn him apart since childhood. The young boy who had felt abandoned, the teenager who had felt betrayed, the man who had tried to kill the past. All these fractured pieces finally aligned into a whole person. Ben Solo immediately set off for Exegol, not as the supreme leader of the First Order, but as a man determined to help Rey face her own darkness. Upon arrival, he found her confronting Palpatine alone. Armed with only a blaster, Ben charged through the Citadel, confronting his former subordinates, the Knights of Ren. In a display of newfound clarity and purpose, he defeated all 6 knights, despite being outnumbered and without his lightsaber. When Rey sensed his presence and passed Anakin Skywalker's lightsaber to him through their bond, the moment symbolized their true connection, now untainted by manipulation or darkness. Fighting side by side against Palpatine, they represented the unity of Skywalker and Palpatine bloodlines against the darkness that had tried to corrupt them both. The Emperor, recognizing the power of their dyad, changed tactics. Instead of having them kill each other, he drained their combined life force to restore his own decayed body. This left Rey severely weakened and Ben thrown into an abyss. As Rey summoned the strength of all past Jedi to defeat her grandfather once and for all, the effort left her drained of life, collapsing to the ground. Ben Solo, having climbed back from the pit despite serious injuries, crawled to Rey's lifeless body. Cradling her in his arms, he made the ultimate choice. He transferred all of his remaining life force into her, using the same healing technique she had used on him. This final act brought Rey back to life, but cost Ben his own. As Rey awakened, they shared a brief moment of connection. Ben Solo smiled, perhaps his first genuine smile in years, before his body faded away, becoming one with the Force. His sacrifice mirrored his grandfather's redemption, as Anakin too had given his life to save his son Luke. The cycle of Skywalker tragedy and redemption had come full circle. The journey from Ben Solo to Kylo Ren and back to Ben again represented one of the most complex character arcs in the Star Wars saga. Born carrying the weight of multiple legacies, manipulated from childhood by dark forces, driven by anger and fear, yet ultimately finding the strength to choose his own path, Ben Solo's story reminds us that redemption is always possible, that the light never truly abandons us, and that sometimes the greatest strength comes not from dominance, but from sacrifice.